Automation drift occurs when an AI companion either trivializes the game by essentially playing it for the user, or falls so far behind the power curve that it becomes a bystander. In the early game, these units often start too strong, automating the challenge away before the player has a chance to engage with the mechanics. As the campaign progresses, the player's power grows through gear and skills, while the companion remains tied to static baseline math. This causes the companion to become obsolete as enemies scale. The standard response is to implement a secondary, parallel upgrade economy, forcing the player to grind separate resources just to keep the companion viable. Solving this cycle requires moving away from independent flat damage scaling. Instead of isolated stat boosts, designers can use behavioral conditioning to gate a companion's output by specific player actions. Fixing these units requires redesigning the mathematical relationship between player input and companion effectiveness. We can analyze this architectural relationship through a specific case study, the Orichalcum. This configuration card maps the unit's abilities from amp charge to Faraday shield. Notice the technical descriptions lack any baseline damage statistics. Instead, markers at level 4 and 8 show the unit uses dependent progression scaling to maintain relevance. This scaling is paired with a behavioral output loop, which requires a specific playstyle to activate the unit's systems. Equipping this card acts as a behavioral contract, where the player must meet specific movement and positioning requirements to access the companion's power. The first requirement is found in the amp charge mechanic. To gain a Tesla charge, the player must move continuously for 6 seconds. The segmented bar below the text provides a real-time feedback loop, showing how close the player is to completing the movement condition. This strict timer prevents static strategies. Players who attempt to camp behind cover lose their charges, effectively deactivating the companion. The mechanic forces a kiting strategy, requiring the player to remain mobile during combat to keep the system active. Once the movement condition is met, the companion delivers its payload, a guaranteed 1-second EMP stun on the next hit. This gates a high-utility crowd control effect behind a spatial awareness test, ensuring the player earns the companion's support through physical input. At level 4, the unit unlocks the Tesla COIL, which reveals the unit's offensive math. The Oricalcum has no independent base damage. Its output is entirely relative to the player. As shown in the amp charge block, the burst damage is calculated as 75% of the linked vehicle's DPS. The same fractional logic applies to the Tesla COIL, which deals 12.5% of the vehicle's DPS every half second. This graph compares standard static scaling against this dependent model. Static units eventually flatline, while the Oricalcum scales automatically as the player grows stronger. This dependent scaling shadows the primary power curve exactly, removing the need to balance a separate upgrade economy. By anchoring the math to the primary vehicle, the companion maintains mathematical parity across the entire game. Defensively, the unit begins with Whole Boost++, a baseline passive state. A 20% armor increase provides a reliable survival buffer for early game encounters. This simple passive is eventually supplemented by the level 8 capstone, the Faraday shield. The Faraday shield only triggers when the vehicle is stunned by an EMP. It removes the effect and provides a 5-second shield. This reactive cleanse is limited by a 20-second cooldown, requiring the player to track when it is available. The progression from a passive armor buff to a conditional reactive cleanse shifts the unit from a simple stat boost to a tactical countermeasure. Automated companions do not necessarily lower the mechanical skill required by the player. This flowchart illustrates how physical player input is mapped directly to the companion's output state. On the Oricalcum, 6 seconds of movement triggers a 75% damage burst and an EMP stun, which then allows the sustained area of effect damage to hit the target. Managing this 6-second movement cadence while monitoring the Faraday shield cooldown requires constant attention from the player. Units that attack automatically, when designed this way, require more rhythmic player input than standard manual weapons. The Oricalcum demonstrates how to eliminate automation drift through systems design. Dependent progression scaling ensures the companion remains mathematically relevant in the late game. The behavioral output loop prevents passive play by tying effectiveness to movement and positioning. Effective systems engineering uses math to dictate how tools are wielded, ensuring the companion remains an active part of the gameplay loop.